Hey guys, I want to welcome you back to another Teach Time and our final week of Lost and Found. I'm really excited about this week because we get to talk about one more thing from Luke 15 that got lost, but even better than that, we get to talk about celebrating and having a party, which is one of my favorite things to do. I will admit though that ending this series for me is kind of bittersweet. You've heard that term before, right? Bittersweet. And I was thinking to myself, like, we know what sweet tastes like, okay? I've seen you guys at the canteen. You guys know what sweet tastes like. But I wonder if you know what bitterness tastes like. And actually, I was reading online, like a little nerd, there are 25% of people in the world whose tongues have taste buds that are more sensitive to bitterness than other people. So 1 in 4 people have a really, really hard time with foods that are bitter. And I was thinking to myself, what are some bitter foods that I know? Because I don't spend a lot of time eating bitter foods. But today we're going to be talking about some things that are bitter and some things that are sweet. So I thought I better familiarize myself with the taste of bitterness. Because I know what sweet tastes like. I love cake, okay, so I know sweet, but I need to know what bitter tastes like. I have here with me a couple little containers. I will explain to you what is in them. And they are full of things that I looked up that are apparently bitter foods. Cocoa powder, I just have a little bit because I don't think I'm gonna need a lot. I'm gonna taste a little bit of this cocoa powder. I should have gotten a little spoon. Okay, I have some on my finger. We're gonna taste this, see if it is bitter. Ooh, ooh. Yes, can confirm cocoa powder is bitter. Want to be COVID safe, so you all just saw me lick my finger, but I am here sanitizing the hands between takes here, okay? Second thing that I have is sesame seeds, and this one I'm a little bit more skeptical about. I've eaten sesame seed bagels all the time, and I have never tasted really a bitterness there, so I'm gonna try some sesame seeds here, see if they are bitter. Oh. Oh, oh, okay. Report back on the sesame seeds. They start out tasting fine, but then as you kind of chew into them, they are definitely bitter. Maybe watching me taste those things has reminded you of some things that have tasted bitter. It's not too hard once you have a taste of it to know when something is bitter or when something is sweet. But bitter is not just a flavor. Bitter is also a feeling or something that we can become if we're not careful. So let's take a time to answer one of these questions as we talk about some things today that are bitter and some things that are sweet. What does it mean to be bitter? And do you think we can control that feeling? I looked up a definition of bitterness, and here is what it says. To be bitter means to be angry or hurt or resentful because you think you've been treated poorly or unfairly. So you might be tempted to become bitter when someone hurts you, when someone gets something that you think you deserve, or when someone is treated in a way that you think that they don't deserve to be treated. And in this series, Lost and Found, we've been talking about people who maybe are lost, and often we talk about those people as maybe people who don't know God or who have drifted far, but today we're gonna talk about how the lost people are not always who you would expect. Let me tell you a story right now of a time that I was bitter. I used to do speech competitions as a junior high and senior high kid, okay? So I would write a 3-minute speech. I would present it to an audience, and I know some of you were like, that is my worst nightmare. Why would you ever do that voluntarily? But as you know, I like talking to people. So I would do these speech competitions, and I would first do it kind of within my grade, and then within the school. And then if I got up the ranks far enough, you could go provincially and do it with kids from other schools. So I made it to the provincial level a couple times. You know those people in movies who have like a rival who shows up at their like sports competitions or whatever every time? I had a rival in the speech competition world. So this girl and her mom would show up at speech competitions with like me and my dad, and we would be always like the 2 top ones. So we'd always be competing against each other. And there was one time when I thought my speech was like out of this world, amazing. I thought my presentation had been awesome. And we get to the judging and I'm kind of sitting there like, how could I not have won this competition? I know I hit it out of the park. People told me afterwards my speech was amazing. And guess who won it? My rival. And I was so upset and so bitter. And these competitions happened in Fredericton, and I lived in Moncton at the time. And the whole drive home from Fredericton, I was so bitter. I was so angry. And I remember what is now one conference was happening that same night, and I just didn't even want to like go or worship or hear about what God was doing because I was so bitter, so angry. I'd let that bitterness take me over because I thought I deserved to win that speech competition, but my rival won it instead, and it didn't feel fair. So we're gonna pause and talk about another question. When someone else succeeds or gets celebrated, how do you feel? And why do you think you feel that way? Today we're going to be back in Luke 15. This is our last time in Luke 15, and maybe you have been reading along Luke 15 and you go, wait, Hannah, there are no more stories. We talked about the story of the lost sheep, we talked about the story of the lost coin, and we talked about the story of the lost son. So what else do we have to talk about here? Well, remember that Jesus told these stories. They were parables, stories he made up to prove a point, to show the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, that they maybe had a wrong way of thinking, or they had some attitudes in their hearts that needed to be corrected. And all this time we've been talking about things that were lost, things that maybe were far from God that got brought back. And the point was Jesus was saying to the Pharisees and saying to us as we've learned, when people who we think aren't valuable are far, or when people who maybe are doing the wrong things are far, they can be brought back. But there's another kind of lost that you can be. And I think that Jesus was not just saying there are lost things that get brought back, and Pharisees, you should have compassion on these people. But Jesus was also saying, hey Pharisees, in your attitudes right now towards other people, you're also kind of lost. And that is where our story today comes in. This story is kind of like the twist at the end. Like you thought it was all over, but there's another character who's gonna come into our story who has lots to teach us today. So we're going back to the story of the prodigal son. You remember the son runs away from his father. He has all his money, he squanders all the money, he comes back. His father should be really mad and really angry, but instead he welcomes him back and throws him a party. And the lost son was found. But I want you to remember that at the beginning of this story, the Bible tells us this is not just a story about one lost son. In the beginning, it says there's actually two sons. So there's the son that runs away and squanders his money. And then there's another son who's kind of been creeping in the background this whole time, who stays home. And in this story, Jesus is going to share about how that son might be just as lost as the son who ran away, but in a different way. So let's take some time to read this story. All this time, the older brother was out in the field. That whole time he was working for his dad. When the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, he heard music and dancing, right? Because there's being a party thrown for the son that came back. Calling over one of the houseboys, he asked what was going on. He told him, your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast, barbecued beef, because he has him home, safe and sound. Right now we have a chance to see how this older brother is going to react. Maybe we expect that he's going to react like the father, like, hey, my son was lost and now he's found. My brother was long lost and now he's found. I don't know how many movies have been made about long lost brothers or sons being found and the awesome family reunion that happens when they come back together. So let's see how he reacts. This is Luke 15, 28 to 30. The older brother stomped off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. What? His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said, look, how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours who has thrown away your money shows up and you go all out with a feast? His father said, son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead and he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. In this story, we can see the father's response to the lost son coming home is really deeply troubling to the older brother. He feels like He didn't get what he deserved. The lost son is getting all this stuff that he definitely doesn't deserve after going and squandering his wealth. And he's feeling maybe like less valued or less appreciated. And when we start to have those feelings, we can start to feel angry, we can start to feel jealous, or we can start to resent the other person. And all those feelings, when we sit in them for too long, can allow us to become bitter. I sat in my speech competition attitude of, hey, that wasn't fair for the whole drive home from Fredericton to Moncton. And by the end of that, I can tell you, I was feeling bitter. As Jesus was telling this story, I can picture the Pharisees kind of having like a aha moment where they go, wait a minute. He's telling us that we're the lost son. We're seeing other people come back to God, but we're being bitter about it instead of celebrating it. We're seeing people who we don't think deserve to be loved by God being loved, but we're jealous of that or resentful of that instead of celebrating it. And sometimes you and I can have the same reaction, right? We see people getting things that we think that they don't deserve, or maybe we even see people becoming Christians and we feel like, oh, is that genuine or is that the real deal? Or look at me, I've been following God a lot longer than them. Why is God doing so many cool things in their life? But just like the older brother in the story who becomes bitter, when we become bitter like that, we also can wander away from God. We can become lost in a different way. In this story, the father actually invites the older son to the party. And this is what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees, like, hey, it's not too late. You can still be invited to the party. You may have been feeling this way. You may have had this attitude, but come and join us. Come celebrate those who were lost and have been found. We notice in this story that it doesn't tell us what the son actually does. Does he go and join the party, or does he decide he doesn't want to go? And I think that's on purpose. I think this story is an open invitation to us. We can continue maybe to stay bitter in our attitudes, or we can choose to join the party, to celebrate those that God celebrates. Why don't we take a minute right now and talk about this question? What does Jesus' story show us about God? And maybe what is it showing you about yourself or about each other? Is anyone here a sports fan? My dad loves the Toronto Maple Leafs, so I grew up following the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'll tell you, it's been a hard slug because they really have not won anything in a long time. They've had some times where they've kind of risen up and you think it's gonna be a win, but they lose. And I've watched my dad just faithfully follow the Toronto Maple Leafs, even though they keep losing and losing. Yeah, I'm hearing there's maybe some Leafs fans in the room, or maybe some people who are agreeing with me that the Leafs kind of keep losing and maybe we shouldn't follow them as a team. I don't know. Sometimes we think about life like this though, even though it's not the way that God wants us to think about it. We think that if someone else is winning, that must mean that we have to be losing. And this is something that our culture and our society tries to tell us all the time. When someone else gets noticed, though, it doesn't mean that we're not getting noticed. When someone else gets valued, it doesn't mean that we're not getting valued, though culture would like to tell us that. When someone else gets welcomed, it doesn't mean that we're not welcomed. And when someone else gets a party thrown for them, it doesn't mean that we're not worth celebrating. In this story, Jesus didn't just want to say that those who were lost, that God notices them and values them and wanted them to be brought back. But Jesus also wants to change our attitudes as well. And when people come to know God, there's a celebration that happens. When people decide that they want to follow Jesus, there's a celebration that happens. And it doesn't mean for those of us who have been faith followers for a long time that we're not worth celebrating, but instead Jesus invites us to join the party. When we get in this mindset that, oh, someone else is being celebrated and I wish I was, or someone else won that thing and I lost and I wish I had won, that's what creates bitterness. And the message of Jesus is that we don't have to be bitter. We know that we're valued. We know that we're loved. And because of that, we don't have to let bitterness take over our hearts, but we can be filled with joy. We can join God's party. No matter who's being celebrated, what's being celebrated, we're invited to join in. Here's a question that I have for you today. Is there someone in your life that you can think about that maybe you feel bitter towards? Maybe you feel judgmental towards them? Did you know that that person is worth so much to God, that they're so valued, that they're so worth celebrating? And even today, you can pray and say to God, you know what? I've been sulking over here in the corner and I haven't been able to join in the party. Will you help me to join the party? Will you take away my bitterness? Will you take away my feelings of judgment? And will you help me to just enjoy and celebrate others? Let's pray and ask God to help us to do that. You know, feeling bitter is definitely one of the ways that we can get lost or feel distanced or far from God. Let's take some time to pray right now. Those of us who maybe are feeling a little bit bitter tonight, or especially bitter, that God would help us to see how He loves and values everyone, us and other people, and that He invites us to join the party. Finally, let's answer one more question. What are some ways that we can ask God to help us change our attitudes when we become bitter?